Welcome to Albuquerque UFO UAP Explorations. We welcome Jon Knowles for a presentation on UFOs and remote viewing. Jon brings decades of experience in remote viewing and associative remote viewing. His impressive background includes active roles with TransDimensional Systems, Aurora Remote Viewing Groups, Applied Precognition Project, and now he's in my very own Mapping Mavericks. Jon has been a project manager, training coordinator, viewer, and analyst. He's conducted client work, trained others in remote viewing, and explored its applications in groundbreaking projects. He has shared his insights through multiple presentations at the IRVA conferences over many years and the Applied Precognition Project conferences. And tonight, he spoke with us about the historical background of UFOs and remote viewing. Let's welcome Jon. So welcome everyone to ABQ UFOs. We are delighted tonight to introduce Jon Knowles. Jon Knowles is an incredible person. He has been a remote viewer for almost 30 years, just like me. And he worked with me back in the day at TransDimensional Systems. He was in charge of my student development program back then. And he's still working with me today. He's an incredible remote viewer. He took my September class in transdimensional mapping and has all kinds of interesting ideas about things. He has been looking at what all of these remote viewers from the military men and women until today, what they've been doing with UFOs and remote viewing. And it's really interesting and enlightening. Jon's thoughts may not mirror mine. I have a very expansive view of the universe and what is possible with remote viewing and UFOs. And Jon is looking at what everyone has done with remote viewing, UFOs, and this phenomenon. And I am so excited to present, to allow him to present his information, because I think it's really important, especially today when so much is happening in the world around the UFO phenomenon. So much is happening. And those of us who are remote viewers, we're looking at all of these things, and we have to wonder, is it safe to look at these things? Is it okay to look at these things? What might we find? So let's turn it over to Jon and find out. Okay, Jon, you're on.
So to share, it says send a request to share. Oh,
there you go.
Okay, let's see here. Is that okay? Can you see the full screen?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay, good. So thank you for that introduction. Birdie is extremely positive, and I appreciate the introduction, but I can't live up to all of that. But so this is a show that I gave at the IRVA conference, but I've modified it for this presentation. 2024 year of euphoria. An awful lot happened in that year. And so I'm going to hit some of the highlights, but there's way too many to go into in any depth. And while you're imagining what it's like to be inside this UFO, let me say a couple of things about how I got here. And first, that I've never seen a UFO. I've never been abducted. I'm not a contactee. I may have seen an NHI, a non-human intelligence, but I was a child, and I'm not sure that happened. But in 1952, when I was 14, there was a big flap of UFOs over DC. And as I recall, that's when I started getting interested in UFOs, thinking there must be something to it if it's in the newspapers. This is back in 1952. And if there are so many people and photographs that it really happened. So I started reading science fiction. And then in 1958, I took an astronomy course in college in the spring. And the instructor was J. Allen Hynek, who was the Blue Book, Project Blue Book head, the scientific head. He didn't talk about UFOs, but I found out later about Project Blue Book, and so I said, gee, I took a course with that guy. So that was pretty interesting because he had us actually read a book by Donald Menzel, an astronomer, which debunked UFOs. And at the time even, I said to myself, methinks he doth protest too much, because Menzel wouldn't acknowledge that any UFO could actually exist. And then in the 1980s and 90s, I started going to UFO conferences and reading. I have 125 books on UFOs, so I've been following it now for 60 some years. So tonight, I want to cover these topics briefly. UFOs, UAPs, highlighting the people and organizations in 2024, the great variety of experiences that people have with these entities, communications with them, and then the UFO experiences. Are they positive, negative, mixed? And then can you use remote viewing to explore the UFO phenomenon? Then contactees and two issues, blowback and a definitive material appearance. And then when we get to the question and answer, we can talk more about drones and orbs, and I have some more slides on those. So I'll also have yes, no theme going throughout this. So here we have yes from David Grush, who was a person who was sanctioned by the intelligence community to release information about secret programs that were conducted to back engineer UFOs. And he's appeared before Congress, been very prominent in 2024. On the negative side, we have Sean Kirkpatrick, who was head of AARO, AARO, which was an organization set up allegedly to funnel and report on UFO experiences. But he's a complete skeptic, but he's now no longer in that role. For the first time in a long time, senators and congresspeople have been promoting disclosure. And Chuck Schumer in the upper left, the leading person in the Senate for the Democrats, actually co-sponsored legislation for disclosure. It didn't make it into the final defense authorization bill. And some people might wonder, well, why would Chuck Schumer do that? He's very prominent, never said a word about it before. He said, well, Harry Reid, the senator from Nevada, who's since passed, was my mentor, and he was very much into UFO disclosure. And then we have Senator Rubio on the right and Tim Burchett and Nancy Mace, Republicans, who have also expressed a strong desire to have at least some disclosure. In addition, Dr. Kozlowski in the upper right there, he replaced Sean Kirkpatrick, and he testified before the Senate, although there were only two senators there in the hearing. And I'm going to read primarily the material in green. I put a lot more material in white in these slides, but it'll be there if you want to go back over them. But on the green, so the Department, I've got something in the way here, okay. The Department of Defense spokesman Susan Goff on the left remained tight-lipped about the glowing orbs that we've been seeing. I don't have anything for you on this, she said to the Daily Mail. And then also it became known that there was something called the Immaculate Constellation Program. That hadn't been heard about until recent weeks. And that was a program that the government, some agency set up to sort of squirrel away all of the information that came into other government organizations that were detecting these things and keep it away from public scrutiny. So there's a whistleblower who's produced a 80-page paper on this matter, and it's another shocker for 2024. That not only have some agencies been conducting this investigation, but there's one that just squirrels it all away. And as at the bottom, so there's been UFO drone swarms have been reported also over bases in England. It's not just New Jersey. It's all over the world, and we'll get to that more later. Louis Elizondo is another prominent figure from 2024, and he wrote a book, Imminent, which is a New York Times bestseller, and he's been going around the country making a lot of presentations about what he knows. And he's also under NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, so there's only certain things he can say. So here's the first remote viewing connection. In his book, Louis Elizondo talks about having been trained in remote viewing by Gene Lessman, who's not a very well-known figure in the remote viewing history, but he did exist. So Louis says he's been gifted, that it's now second nature to him, that he could write an entire book on remote viewing. So that's a big surprise. And I think Paul Smith is actually looking into trying to get an interview with Louis Elizondo about this subject. Jesse Michaels, who's an interviewer, interviewed Elizondo and said, "I'm not going to lie, when I spend time with you, when we spend a decent amount of time together and so forth," he says at the bottom, "What is imminent?" Elizondo says, "Time is not a luxury that we can afford." He never has amplified on what he means by that, but there's apparently something he's been told is happening that we are not doing, we're not preparing. And then on the right, more on drones and what Louis Elizondo has to say about them. He said, "Their size and hours-long loiter times are signs of the state-sponsored capability." I noted tonight that Trump actually said that he gets briefings on these matters, and he won't say why, but he says the government knows what's going on, but they won't say why. So that also indicates probably some sort of state-sponsored capability. In addition, there have been a number of organizations that have come forward in 2024 or before. The Soul Foundation, with the scientists Gary Nolan and Peter Skafish, had a conference in 2023, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. And they have all of these high-level scientists who are trying to investigate various aspects of remote viewing of the UFO phenomenon. Actually, Gary Nolan is interested in remote viewing too. And he did a session for Ed May, who's a famous researcher for the Stanford Research Institute, and Gary Nolan said he was blown away by what happened. So even someone like Gary Nolan is interested in remote viewing. In addition, Danny Sheehan and his wife Sarah Nelson formed the Citizens for Disclosure out of the New Paradigm Institute. And Danny Sheehan's a longtime civil rights activist lawyer, going way back to the Pentagon Papers and many other cases. He's very progressive, very competent, and he's in his 80s, like I am, and he's still going very strong. In fact, he made these two claims that we know of two UFO bases. One of them is underwater near Guadalupe Island off Baja, Mexico, and submarines have monitored over 100 USOs entering or exiting the sea, unidentified submerged object. And Dennis Sheehan doesn't make stuff up, so he must have some reliable sources to make that claim. He also makes the claim that north of Sedona, Arizona, in the secret mountain wilderness, there are US airplanes, jets, that are accompanying mantids, insectoids 7 feet tall. And again, this is pretty hard to believe, but again, Danny Sheehan is an extremely reliable source, in my opinion. He's also commented on the drones and so forth. And he had another video out tonight, which I didn't see. I've been trying to keep up all week and update this presentation, but so many different people are reporting on drones with so many different opinions. On the right-hand side, he says, the Senate Intelligence Committee has been told in classified setting that the US government has 9 craft at least. Roswell happened. Majestic 12 is real. That was the organization formed back in the 50s by 12 scientists and prominent people in government to monitor the UFOs and keep it away from the public. The craft have been completely unknown, faster than light propulsion, and living NHI have been interviewed telepathically. In addition, Jim Garrison is heading up the Citizens for Disclosure, which is attempting to build a nationwide grassroots organization to force disclosure. And yesterday in the sum up for the year, they noted that they now have 1,100 volunteers. They are in 33 states, 50 states and 33 countries. And next year they want to amplify that even more. They've also partnered with MUFON, the world's largest UFO organization, which has been conducting research for decades. Another organization is this ET's Let's Talk with Costa Macraeus, who's also here in the Bay Area, California, where I'm located. He's saying we are growing a collective of more than 150,000 peaceful groups and individuals from 100 countries. And they've also had their own People's Disclosure movement here on the right. So there's a number of forces that are really active this year. And Birdie, or Prue, is back, as we all know. As she mentioned, she was my teacher back then, and I'm in her new class now with transdimensional mapping, which is a new method she's been working on for 20 years. It's very engaging, and I was about to retire before she came back into the field, so I'm very pleased to be one of her students. And she's been forefronted by Citizens for Disclosure because she's got the ABQ Albuquerque UFO group of 70, 200 or 200 people from different mediums. She's just been amazing in forming an actual ongoing UFO community in Albuquerque, and there's no other one like it in the country. This is more from the New Paradigm Institute, Danny Sheehan's group, referring to the course that Birdie's going to be teaching about UFO contact by humans, and that'll be in January. And Birdie can talk more about that, of course, later after this presentation's over. So in doing some research for this, I decided to try to find out what studies had been done about the great variety of experiences with ETs and the communication with them. And I found a study by Sean Esbjorn Hargens, which is a meta-study, as we'll see shortly. And then on the right, the free study by the Edgar Mitchell Foundation, where they had a questionnaire for 4,000 people, a very detailed questionnaire, and they produced a book of about 600 pages on it. So from Esbjorn Hargens' survey, his meta-analysis, look at the top there, there's 12 different previous studies that he's summarizing. And we see that there's an incredible variety of creatures and entities that humans have encountered over the centuries. Human-looking, reptilians, short grays, insectoids, and so forth are common ones, but there are plenty of less common ones. And sometimes in the remote viewing community, we hear there may be 4 or 8 or 26 types of ETs. It appears there may be well more than that. And they're said to be coming from places like the Pleiades and Sirius A and B and other places, which we have no confirmation of. Here's another way to look at it, where there's 12 at the bottom, 12 different hypotheses about what's going on. And there's no unanimity. And Jacques Vallée, who I'll talk about a little bit later, after, I don't know, 50 years of research of this, says we really haven't learned anything reliable about them in the last many years. So it's up in the air as to what's going on. Are they thought forms? Are there archetypes? Are they humans? Non-human intelligences, and so forth. There's quite a variety. Another chart from another researcher, which shows, again, the incredible variety of entities that humans encounter, from humanoids, amphibians, insectoids, robotic, and so forth. And of course, all kinds of grays. So let's look at what one researcher was told by one contactee, Betty Anderson-Luca, as an example of the kinds of things that contactees and abductees say happens and that they witness or hear about. Again, I'll read primarily the green. So they can travel between star systems. They exist in a timeless realm. They can read and control human minds. They can communicate telepathically. They can pass through physical objects with ease. We've heard many stories of that type. They can transform their bodies into balls of energy and back again. And they can conduct advanced complex genetic operations on human life forms. There have been attempts to communicate with ETs by many, many people, and here's 5 books about that subject. On the left, we have How to Talk to an Alien by Nancy Duterte, who is a remote viewer. It's not actually a manual about how to do that, but it has interesting cases of contact. And then in the center toward the right, Intentions by Prue, her book that she came out with around 2002, and with her personal experiences, which she may want to talk about later today too. And we heard a lot about back in TransDimensional Systems when we were active back then in 2000, 2003. And here's another remote viewer, Angela T. Smith, who wrote a book co-authored, Voices from the Cosmos. These are some reviews from Amazon. And on the upper left says it's one of the most important books ever published. By that's his opinion. The other two opinions are, looking at the right there, my mind had a hard time grasping that the EBEs communicating with a human being were truly communicating. Now, Angela is very respected. I've met her. I know her a little bit. She's very respected. She sits down at a computer, or did, and typed the messages she was getting from quite a variety of entities, and she compiled a huge Excel file with all of the particular characteristics of them. So with respect, I do have a hard time grasping that that's actually what was going on. Another aspect of communication is it mental or oral? So while in the UFO community, it's commonly thought that most experiences report such telepathic communication, this may not be accurate. This quote is from an article that I wrote along with Daz Smith for Nexus magazine. And so I looked at cases by Jacques Vallée, Timothy Good, and Mark Davenport, all substantial researchers. And a tally made by them indicates that ETs use their own language 49% of the time, Earth language is 45%, and telepathy only 9%. However, all these studies were pretty old, several decades old, and it may be that in recent decades, telepathy has become, as we tend to think of it, as dominant in communication between entities and humans. As an example of the weird kind of things that may be coming up, here's from Linda Moulton Howe at the bottom there. Jim Sparks was the contactee, and he was very aware and alert in his contacts with the aliens, who made him learn their language, he says. So if in the upper left you had 20 pages of an ET of what was equivalent to written English, he was taught to boil that down to 2 pages on the upper right, and then down to shorthand in the left-hand side, and then to a circle. So this, again, is a very untraditional means of communication, obviously. And it kind of reminded me of the movie Arrival, which is based on a short story by Ted Chiang, which also talks about very unusual communication methods. So it may not all be telepathic or communicating in one's native language. There's also other kinds of things going on. So turning to the basic question, which is to oversimplify, are ETs good or not? So on yes, we have John Mack and Stephen Greer, both researchers. John Mack has since passed. Stephen Greer is still very active, feeling that they're all benevolent. And on the right-hand side, we have David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins, who were researchers primarily in the 80s and 90s and did a lot of hypnotic regressions, and felt that there was sufficient evidence that there were negative sides to the ETs. So let's take a look at some of the experiences, starting with the positive viewpoint. And this is from that free study I mentioned earlier. Contactee experiences do not necessarily conform to the traditional belief of alien abduction. They can occur non-physically, via telepathy, out of body, matrix-like reality, and so forth. I was surprised to see that approximately 80% of the study participants claimed that their interaction with UAP and/or NHI had a positive impact on their lives. More than half reported having received reassuring messages, a spiritual message, or a message of love and oneness. Certainly, the messages received were consistent with those reported from the study population involving NHIs by psychologist Kenneth Ring. Similar to the free study results, Ring reported individuals became more spiritual and so forth. Going to the next paragraph. So in addition to those 2 studies, the free and the Ring UAP studies, only 2 other large population survey-based studies have addressed this phenomenon in detail. These include the MUFON Experiencer Survey and the Phoenix Lights Experiencer Study. These 2 studies replicated the findings of both the free and Ring studies by showing unique similarities and features of the experience and the after effects facilitated by the experience on the individual. So 4 large studies have shown that there's a fairly positive aspect to ET human communication. Now let's look at some of the negative viewpoints and mixed viewpoints. I'd never heard of Chet Dembeck before. He's a researcher, And he writes, if there's one misguided theme I have heard repeated many times in and outside of the UFO community, it is the notion that UFOs and extraterrestrials are our benevolent technological and spiritual superiors. This mantra has been repeated ad nauseum ever since the first UFO was sighted. On the contrary, there is much more proof that these uninvited guests who boldly penetrate our airspace have at times kidnapped, injured, and killed innocent humans and animals. Looking at a specific case, Bob Pratt, a journalist, wrote this book, UFO Danger Zone, with a foreword by Jacques Vallée. Both of them went separately to Brazil several times to interview people there. And here's a typical encounter. So you're in a remote area in Brazil. You're out alone at night or with others. A bright fireball object appears over your head. It shines a light that's brighter than daylight, and 2 or 3 small beings are occasionally seen. It shoots a ray down onto a person, often burning them. The person runs away or clings to a tree to avoid being levitated, pulled, or pushed. UFO hangs around, doesn't find the person, or maybe the person is paralyzed and rendered unconscious and wakes up not knowing what happened. And the result is shock, burns, extreme fear, headaches, and so forth, including illness, loss of pregnancy, incapacitation, or rarely death. What's missing? No warnings about climate disasters, no images of cities destroyed, no warnings about nuclear weapons, no messages of love, all of which appear to many contactees. No Greys or Nordics, no telepathy, no engagement with the people, just hunting them. So in large isolated areas in Brazil for weeks on end, people were afraid to go out alone at night because of the fear of the repeated presence of UFOs, chupa-chupas, suckers. These ETs are not space brothers or advanced benevolent beings guiding humanity to become responsible members of the cosmos. But here's a later reflective view from Bob Pratt, who wrote the earlier book I mentioned. I have come gradually to the view that it is the fundamental foreignness of these strange beings, our almost total inability to understand in human terms what they are up to, that more than anything else brings about the terror that the abductees and the rest of us experience in relation to them. Once the fears associated with this strange connection are confronted and transcended, relationships between human beings and the others can reach emotional, sensual, and spiritual intensities and depths that exceed anything with which I'm familiar in human relationships. Certainly a very strong statement. Another negative take is from Robert Shelsky. This may seem hard to believe, difficult for the average individual even to countenance is really happening. The idea that UFOs or extraterrestrials may actually cause such terrible things, but the evidence for this is there. Again, that they can sometimes injure and kill people. He also refers to permanent disappearances of individuals and whole groups at the bottom. However, others do suffer actual physical injuries, sometimes severe in nature. These are a measurable effect upon the witness. Moreover, still others die. Sometimes they die alone and horribly, but sometimes in groups as well. One more on the negative side, Carla Turner, although it's kind of mixed, in spite of what some prominent abduction theorists tell us about avoiding thinking in terms of good and evil or positive and negative, when it comes to the aliens, it simply cannot be done, nor should it be. Many people who see alien interaction as a positive event for humanity point to the growth and changes abductees often evince as proof that the aliens are working to elevate the psychic abilities of our race. Defenders of alien interaction claim that these sorts of changes are a deliberate product of the contact experience, evidence of the aliens' benevolent interest in humanity. On the basis of many abduction reports, there is hope that our species is awakening. So although she had a pretty negative take overall, when I read through her book, she does have some mixed views there. Ross Coulthard's another figure who appeared in 2024. He's an Australian journalist and UFO researcher, become quite prominent. He says, my point is that there have been times the phenomenon has reportedly been malevolent, Colares, that was in Brazil. But if energized the explanation, the majority of reports from experiencers suggest a broadly benevolent intent. And here's another remote viewing tie. UFO Joe, mentioned there at the bottom, that's Joe Murgia, who studied and was trained by Prue back in the day in remote viewing. Now, what about remote viewing, using that for UFO exploration? At the 2023 Seoul Symposium that I mentioned earlier, There were 220 of us there. And these four luminaries, along with others, were sort of trapped with us for 2 days. There was lunches and everything. So I figured, well, I'll ask these folks what they think about using remote viewing to explore UFOs. So I went up to Colonel John Alexander on the upper left, and he said, of course you can use remote viewing. They're very closely tied. Why wouldn't you do that? Almost like, why would you raise the question? Deborah Katz and I went up to Hal Puthoff, the head of the Stanford Research Institute Stargate program way back, and asked him, and he said, well, I'll have to think about it. They said, oh, you can go to Mount Perdido in Spain and see if that alien base is there that Pat Price talked about, and I'll get to that in a minute. So he was at least positive that you could use it for that purpose. Russell Targ, another primary pioneer with Hal Puthoff at Stanford Research Institute, said, no, you should really not do that because we don't know enough about either remote viewing nor UFOs. He was pretty clear about that. Then I asked Jacques Vallée, and it's not widely known, but Jacques Vallée was trained in remote viewing by Ingo Swann in stages 1 and 2 at the Stanford Research Institute. So I saw him standing there. I just went up to him and said, I asked him about that. And he said, no, you shouldn't use remote viewing for UFOs, again, for the same reason that Russell Targ did. And we talked a little bit, and he had mentioned that he was remote viewing for Ingo Swann, and he did a session. He felt really cold. And Ingo said, well, you're on top of a mountain in Peru. So I said, well, sounds like you were a good remote viewer. You didn't continue, though? He said, no, I wasn't very good. And then he was kind enough to listen while I told him a couple of anecdotes about J. Allen Hynek, who was his mentor, Vallée's mentor, from when I took the astronomy course. And at the end, he said, I said, thank you. He said, thank you. The pleasure is mine, a true gentleman. Now, we also have a revelation from Ross Coulthard, brand new last couple of weeks. The Air Force has been working on psionics, by which he means remote viewing, for many decades. They have never stopped investigating the power of the mind and human consciousness ever since the Stargate program and the remote viewing program. I can tell you it's not BS. I've seen it for myself. And he says, I think the NHI are showing themselves in our skies to tweak our consciousness to make us aware of capabilities we don't even realize. So the Air Force has not really been named before as the group that has ongoing remote viewing programs since they were shut down by the CIA in 1995. There's been some indications that, in fact, yes, there has been a continuing program, but this is the first time I've heard the Air Force named. And again, Ross Coulthard is a very reliable journalist who must have some solid sources to be making that statement. Regardless of what people think about whether we should use remote viewing to look into UFOs, there have been many, many projects by remote viewers about UFOs, and some of which involve contact. Joe McMoneagle, one of the leading remote viewers, has done several different projects, as you can see here on the list. I'm just going to refer to 3 of them, the ones in green, but these other ones are all worth looking at if you're interested in this subject and what remote viewers have found out in their contacts and attempts to look at UFOs. I'm going to refer to this one because it's one I conducted. What was that thing in the sky over Oakland, California in November 1896? And I chose that because I live in Oakland and there's a library here with microfiche that has newspaper reports from those days. Back then, there was a flap of UFOs, they didn't call them that at the time, but of UFOs moving across the country. And it's thought that a lot of those reports were just newspaper editors trying to drum up circulation. But I tasked 3 remote viewers, 2 of whom were excellent remote viewers from Birdie's group, TransDimensional Systems. And after looking at those sessions, my conclusion was that, in fact, yes, there was something remarkable, anomalous that was over Oakland in those days. Project 8200. So on the left, we have Pat Price, who is one of the foremost remote viewers for the Stanford Research Institute back in the 70s. And he, on his own, did some research, some remote viewing amounting to 47 pages, which he dumped on Hal Puthoff's desk one day and said, you might be interested in this. how Puthoff gave it to Skip Atwater on the right. Years later, Skip Atwater was in Fort Meade Remote Viewing Unit, and he decided to task other viewers, including Mel Riley, about whether their data would match what Pat Price said about 4 alien bases existing on Earth. So he's done some presentations at the International Remote Viewing Association conferences, and he published a book last June or so on this subject called Project 8200. Now, they didn't publish all 47 pages of Pat Price's original document. And Des Smith did publish it recently. I worked with Des for over a year as we tried to get permission to do this. So I actually was the person that typed up these notes from trying to read how Pat Price's handwriting. And there's some pretty alarming material in these 47 pages. This is just 2 pages. I'll come to some other pages a little bit later. So in addition to all of that, occasionally we're going to find things like this. So this is the source is Cosmic Awareness, from a newsletter from 1992 to 09. Someone who went to the Monroe Institute, which is a famous institute in Virginia, which has ties with remote viewing. In fact, Joe McMoneagle and Skip Atwater both currently are involved there and have been for decades. So this person says, the institute that Bob Monroe operates in Faber, Virginia, was set up with an alien guidance, and pillars of energy were placed in certain areas on the property. I have seen, as have others, these aliens who are guardians of the institute, although they seem out of phase with the physical. Are these aliens from the Pleiades or elsewhere? While in their isolation booth, I was experimented on by aliens who looked like the Dulce group. They said they wanted to find a way to synthesize emotions and used a beam to generate sorrow in me. I've never taken a course at the Monroe Institute, although I've been there. They were cooperating with the International Remote Viewing Association in the conference that was held in Charlottesville in 2023. And I've never heard this story. I doubt it's true. I'm citing it as an example of the kind of wild things that may occur as people claim to have alien contacts. Now, talking about contactees, Jerome Clark was another researcher and has written an encyclopedia and this particular book, Extraordinary Encounters. So the contactee movement envisions a densely populated cosmos with hosts of advanced, wise space people linked in a kind of celestial United Nations, usually called the Galactic Federation or something like it. A minority of evil extraterrestrials opposes the Federation's benevolent mission. And just to stress, he also finds a wide assortment of entities, nebulous energy sources, soul clusters, extraterrestrials, ascended masters, interdimensional beings, discarnate Atlanteans and Lemurians, nature spirits, even whales and dolphins. I went through Jerome Clark's book, which lists all of the entities that people claim to have contacted, and the human contactee, and then the planet or home or source. I've got 3 slides of this. And you can see there's quite a variety. Most of these I'd not heard of before. I've heard of Ashtar that we'll get back to in a second. And then also Bashar. I have it Paul Anka, but it should be Daryl Anka. And then here's another set of them. So many impressions from different people or entities claiming to come, many of them from Venus. And there was actually a case in which one contactee said he had been taken to Venus, and he was being charged in a court, and Carl Sagan testified against him, saying that humans cannot live on Venus, and the man was convicted. And it would take quite a stretch for humans to be able to be there. It would take, some sort of transdimensional or rather interdimensional existence, and there's been no evidence of that. And one more, George Adamski on the left there in the middle, Orthon, is well known. But again, many of these are not well known. And it raises the question, well, there are so many, who to believe? Sharana, another entity, criticized those who refuse to believe contact stories. If contactees' reports are sometimes contradictory, she said, it is with good reason. Your Earth people are contacting space people from different planets and different cultures and different stages of development. Therefore, the reports could hardly be the same. I don't have any disagreement with that. It seems incontrovertible. But what about when you have conflicting accounts? Here we have Ashtar, was originally mentioned by George Van Tassel, who was quite famous. But before long, other channelers were receiving material from Ashtar as well as his associates. So many Ashtar channelings occurred that soon Ashtar was warning some communicants that evil astral entities were impersonating him. And toward the bottom, so the Ashtar of the Ashtar command is a real personality, Brianna Wetlaufer said, a clone of the original Ashtar, and is dangerous, a disobedient angel. We have the same with Semjase, Billy Meyer, who was the original and very famous contactee. Semjase was Billy Meyer's space woman from planet Era in the Pleiades and spent 8 years in a parallel universe. Fred Bell of Laguna Beach also told tales of Semjase. So in due course, Meyer denounced Bell's stories as lies. A Pleiadian named Quetzal told Meyer that Bell could not possibly be telling the truth because Semjase and Ptah had never been to America. Moreover, the Pleiadians entered into physical contact only with Meyer and nobody else. Quetzal was among the extraterrestrials with whom Bell supposedly interacted. So you can imagine people reading this who are not familiar with UFO history might say, oh my God, what are you talking about? So which conflicting forecasts and agendas to believe? Again, I'll just touch on some of the green ones. Should we unite with the ETs? They're all benevolent. Or should we take sides in the ET warfare and fight satanic aliens, unite with Christian-oriented ones? Should we prepare for the transition, the rapture, or the rejuvenation of Earth? Or prepare for life under the benevolent dictatorship of aliens? And there's always some humor in these. Develop relations with those inside the Earth, who live inside the Earth, because it's a great market for US goods. That's what John Cleve Sims said. I'd never heard of him before, but people like this are in both the remote viewing community and the UFO community. Another contactee, George Williamson, wrote that the underlying cause of conflict between the Space Confederation and the Unholy Six is that the former are deists and the latter are ideists. In other words, the Space Confederation believes in a divine power to which all are answerable, and the Unholy Six believe only in the primacy of the id, the power of the individual. For countless millennia, there have been no possibilities of reconciliation between these groups, famous contactee Williamson said. I wanted to turn to Deborah Lynn Katz, who I know quite well. We wrote a book together on associative remote viewing, and she's the president of IRVA. So she wrote, I have clients that are suicidal over some of the communications, and I have also been physically impacted in a negative way when connecting. Any beings that use their ability to control humans in their communications are suspect. They can disguise themselves, make us go unconscious, lie to us, and we don't know what we are dealing with. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever remote view them. I do myself. I'm suggesting that establishing an ongoing connection with them on a regular basis could be problematic, especially for newer students who don't know how to sort out what is happening in their own minds and energy fields. I've had clients end up having to be committed to mental wards because they couldn't distinguish between the spirit communication and what was real. Some of these seem to be alien. Some were some kind of entity that was controlling and insane. I had one client who died and another who committed suicide. So if an experienced viewer wants to tune into aliens or a project manager wants to assign a single target, that's one thing. But ongoing encouragement is another thing. Deborah's been doing psychic readings for over 25 years. She has a great deal of experience in this matter. I also asked Daz Smith, another good friend, a top-level remote viewer, publisher of 8 Martinis, which is the leading remote viewing journal, and a member of the Future Forecasting Group, another extraordinary organization, and author of 3 books on remote viewing. So Daz says remote viewing is a passive tool and not an active communication tool for contacting aliens or any other form of life. There is no history or supported scientific background for remote viewing being used for this purpose. And toward the bottom, using any psi method to contact non-human life of any kind can have unintentional consequences on anyone involved. This includes detrimental life and psychological effects to existing mental conditions, both negative or positive, in the practitioner. Feedback is key to determine if any contact or data is real. Also, there's growing scientific evidence of data that indicates that a hitchhiker effect can occur when participating in forms of paranormal exploration. These two can be physically and mentally damaging. So turning to two final points, blowback. So if UFOs are in our skies and oceans and we can't do a thing about it, if aliens have been abducting us for generations, if aliens are deceptive, making us think they are benevolent, if they think of us as farm animals, and some of those things are likely to be true. So if your illusions are shattered, your humanity is dethroned, you learn your deepest beliefs are false, there will likely be major societal upheavals and blowback against the people who brought the bad news. And for that reason, no U.S. administration will release all they know about UFOs, ETs. The incoming U.S. administration may release information, but it'll be very limited, and it'll include misinformation, as the government has been doing for 80 years. And will there be a definitive material appearance, as I'm calling it, a DMA? These are three examples of very famous cases of personal reports of human ET communication, but there's little or complete lack of hard evidence of such communication. We have Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker in the upper left in Mississippi at a shipyard. Betty and Barney Hill, very, very famous case in New Hampshire in the upper right, 1961. And then Travis Walton in Arizona, who was abducted, and again, a very famous case. And he's still been going around talking about his case. I believe him, but it's just not really hard evidence. Also, go back to Pat Price's 47 pages. Here's two more where he's making some extraordinary claims, claiming that agents have infiltrated U.S. and world organizations, agents of the aliens. And he cites a number of organizations here, women's lib groups, Panthers, and so forth. And even all of these organizations. Again, there's no proof of this, but Pat Price was a very accurate remote viewer, but he was also inaccurate plenty of times too, which is acknowledged by Stanford Research Institute. And finally, turning to the orbs, because we've been seeing a lot of drones and orbs. And here's from Angela Thompson Smith's book, where she encountered all of these entities at the top in white. And she spoke to the orbs, and this is what they told her. They act as messengers and servants. They go where they're called, and they enjoy doing so. They carry energy and information coded in their structure. They're totally amorphous, and they like to travel. The Nordics, aliens that look like Norwegians, are incorrect in saying orbs can shift shapes. Nordics are the only regular visitors to Earth that can shapeshift, and so forth. So this is what Angela Smith says the orbs told her, but again, we don't really have confirmation of that. So to conclude, UFOs are real, in my opinion. ETs are real. The U.S. government's cover-up is real. We are in a perilous state here on Earth. One day we will voyage among the stars if we don't destroy ourselves. Are we in any condition, morally, technically, or spiritually, to seek to join a star-traveling or dimension-traversing community of beings? Have remote viewing skills developed enough to provide reliable, unambiguous results from communications with ETs? My view is we should use remote viewing to explore communication with ETs, but in a very careful and limited way. It's a strange, strange world. Let's hope 2025 is a year of euphoria and not malphoria. That's my presentation. Over to you, Birdie.
Hey, John, that was super amazing, super amazing. I really, really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
And I think that, hold on a second, I'm going to spotlight myself for a second.
Sure.
I think that all these things are things that we should think about as remote viewers, as people who are interested in this topic. And in my experience, I haven't had anything negative happen to me in almost 30 years of remote viewing. I have looked at so many different civilizations, different kinds of aliens. I've had communication with so many different types, and I've never had the hitchhiker effect or any kind of negative aspect hit me. So what do you think about that?
Well, I respect your judgment and your experience that can well be true for you. But as we've seen for a number of other people, it's not true. So doesn't that make you a little wary about some aspects of having a lot of people get involved with this?
Yeah, it does a little bit, to be quite honest. I mean, I have been, right now I'm teaching people. I've gotten back into the field after 22 years being kind of silent in the field, and I've recently gotten back. And now I'm working with some folks, and it's super interesting. But there are still some questions. I mean, I recently looked at the drone situation going on in New Jersey, and everyone can find my the first part of my session on YouTube. It's at the No Rivets YouTube. And I felt extremely unsettled when I was looking at what was going on, because I determined that most of what was happening, most of the so-called drones, were actually non-human intelligence. And it made me feel super unsettled. But when I continued to explore what was happening, what made me feel most unsettled wasn't actually the drones themselves, but was the military, the US military response to these drones. It seems to be that our response to what's happening out there seems to create this chaos with what's happening. So I'm kind of wondering, about that. It's really interesting to me to look at what's happening out there and to see how it's unfolding, for us. I looked at the orbs. I found that there's all kinds of interesting things happening. I was getting messages that they're concerned about the Earth, concerned about what we're doing with the Earth, what we're doing with each other. And when I continue to explore, and I'm going to post the second part of my session in a day or probably tomorrow morning, maybe tonight, but I did get that what's happening out there really is super interesting, because there's this military response, and the message that I was receiving from the orbs or the drones themselves was benevolent, but the military response was not benevolent, that they wanted to take down these craft, these creatures, whatever you want to call them. And that was the source of my unsettlement. It's pretty interesting. I haven't had any kind of negative hitchhiker effect or anything negative, happen to me over all these years. And it's really, I don't know.
Well,
I completely respect what other people have experienced here. Mm-hmm. So I'm not at all saying that my experience is correct. I completely respect what other people have experienced.
So that raises 2 points in my mind. They're a little bit separate. If you don't mind, can we go back to the gray dude? And
absolutely.
So for people who don't know, Birdie experienced a gray dude in her bathroom and wrote a whole book about it. And that gray dude provided a lot of information that influenced what TransDimensional Systems did back in the day. And I did ask you a few weeks ago what you thought about the gray dude and the big event that the gray dude was forecasting. Can you say more about that? And I thought you said at the time that maybe you think the great event is happening now, but back then we didn't have a clue it was going to take this long to get to this time. So this is an example of I think you said one of your persons that one of your friends actually could smell the gray dude one time, but nobody else ever saw him. There was no photograph of him. Is that right?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Back at the time, I had this experience, for those who are not familiar with it, and I wrote about it in my book, which you can find at norivets.com. Just click on the book link and you can read my account of this entity which I called the gray dude, which was, he would come into my bathroom at 2:30 every morning. And it was super interesting. I actually took photographs of his footprint on the bath mat. And I invited people to sleep in my bathtub, to sleep in the bathroom, to just meet this entity that was meeting with me. I received these things I called thought balls, which were these encapsulated messages, which were super hard to decode, super hard to figure out. But they were messages about our future, about who we are, telling me that we are on this precipice, that we are in this moment of humanity when we have to figure out who we are. We might become like them. And it was a kind of a warning that we could become less human going forward because of our reliance on technology, because of what's happening on the planet. It was super fascinating at the time. And since then, I've really tried to deconstruct what those messages were about. And I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It was a really interesting time in my life. And I'm not really sure, but I took photographs of the gray dude's footprints on my bath mat. I posted them online 25 years ago, and I invited people to come and to set up cameras and everything. And nobody ever showed up. Nobody ever came and showed up. I think people just thought I was crazy, which maybe I am.
Well,
I don't know.
I certainly didn't think you were crazy, and we used to come down occasionally when you had advanced training, but we didn't get to go into your bathroom. But this raises that issue of in the main, there's very little physical evidence of communication or presence of ETs. I mean, we have Roger Lear, extracting small implants from people's bodies. We have various other indications that UFOs have come. But as far as actual beings, I was going to say, the CE5 folks who go out and look at lights, and I've never done that. That, by the way, that idea was originally from Jacques Vallée. Later, someone else took it over, but that was originally Jacques Vallée's CE5. But those aren't even close encounters of the first kind, because according to Hynek's categories, to be a close encounter of the first kind, it has to be within 500 feet. Now, we maybe get technical here, but mostly people see lights and they have a great time, apparently. And I know in ABQ in Albuquerque, you're doing that too. I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying that it's a far cry from what you had and someone in your bathroom. And I just wish we had photographs of such entities when they do appear to people. So that's why I talk about this material, confirmation that just seems to be lacking. And will we get it? With 2025, apparently all kinds of things are going to happen according to Louis Elizondo and Ross Coulthard. Let's hope so. But that's partly where my stumbling block is. I really need to see some physical evidence of ETs and communicating them and making personal claims, which people do, and they're entitled to. They have these experiences. I'm not doubting people have these experiences, but to convince the mainstream seems like we really need something more than what we've gotten so far, unless I've missed something.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, John, about that. I mean, I think that 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 the whole idea about non-human intelligence visiting certain people, yeah, we don't have the physical evidence. We absolutely do not. I don't have any physical evidence that I can point to for my own experiences. And, this goes back decades. So many people have reported encounters, and there's no physical evidence. There's nothing. And this is a really interesting problem. And I wonder if this is deliberate, if we're not supposed to have, physical evidence, if this is part of what's going on now, part of what's happening, part of, the whole thing. Maybe we're supposed to have faith. It's part of our whole religious and spiritual traditions that we're supposed to have faith in all of this. And
Yeah.
I kind of think it comes down to that. And I can't explain it. It's a
So,
conundrum for sure.
so let me focus something a little more, if I may. So given the
Absolutely.
huge numbers of contactees that exist and more people are coming out claiming to be contactees, and you're going to be teaching folks, as you did our class, sometimes some of the taskings were uh, Bonnie and Betty Hill, for example, what went on with them. How do you deal with the fact that there's going to be hundreds of different stories and agendas that contactees already have, and one can always focus on a small limited group and go one's way. Maybe that's the only way to do it, but we do have all these other entities out there with their human contacts making these claims. And it's just a concern to me that there is so much and yet there's not a material support for it. And humans are wonderful in their imaginations and are great at making up stories. So I think it's something that's difficult to deal with in terms of promoting ET human contact.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with that. I mean, I think that this is a whole new area of human connection with the unknown, and we're now discovering different kinds of aspects of what is possible and what we can do. And there's no litmus test. There are no guidelines. There's no blueprints for us right here. And so, those of us who are involved in remote viewing, we're kind of reaching into areas that maybe we shouldn't reach into. I'm not exactly sure about that, but I really appreciate, your thoughts on this and your whole research and background. I mean, I'm still exploring, but I could do kind of wonder sometimes. In 30 years as a remote viewer, I've never experienced anything negative per se, but I've definitely, experienced kind of an unsettling feeling at times. For example, I recently looked at the drones that are happening in New Jersey and across different parts of the United States these days. And I posted a session that I did, live session. It was blind, I didn't know what it was ahead of time. And I had this super unsettling feeling about what was happening with these drones. These drones I recognized as being mostly a non-human intelligence, and there was military activity around it, military drones and planes and helicopters around this whole situation. But I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that made me very upset. So I stopped my session early and I went back to it and completed it later. And in the exploration of that session, I discovered that what made me feel super unsettled wasn't the NHI, even though that was uncomfortable in some way, I'll say, because it was so non-human. It was so non-human. I can't even describe what it was like. It was this pinpoint of consciousness. But the unsettled feeling mostly was around our response to it, which was really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that going forward, if we're entering a period of potential disclosure in the United States or in the world at large, I think that it's really interesting that we are, that disclosure might be around the whole idea that 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 what we're facing is something that's so unlike us and so non-human that we're afraid of it. And I just really wonder about all of that, about, what might be going on. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think that I certainly don't want to get anyone involved in remote viewing or anything else where they're going to feel uncomfortable or feel that something's following them home or something is going to affect them mentally in some way.
Yeah.
So yeah, have
Well,
you, hey John, you've looked
yeah.
at all kinds of non-human intelligence. Have you personally ever felt that anything was negative in any way that you've looked at?
In doing remote viewing sessions, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, actually, but it was more just human negativity than ET negativity. But can I get back to your session that you did on drones? I thought that was an amazing session. If people haven't watched the video, how many people are out there demonstrating that they can do remote viewing live? And you said you did it blind. I wonder if it wasn't just some topic that was in the air, like it was when we did the big event back in TransDimensional Systems. We did so many sessions of the big event that we thought, well, it's in the air, maybe we're getting it. Now, it's true that drones are in the air in people's minds, but I take it that the person who tasked you, you had no clue that it was going to be about drones. So Jim Garrison said this was an amazing session, and I agree with him completely about that, because you start out and you get stuff that's confirmable. In other words, that we see these drones over New Jersey, and basically you're describing those kind of drones. And then you get into the more esoteric, as you just laid out, which is not confirmable, but based on the fact that the other stuff was confirmable, you have to open your mind to say, well, maybe it's true, kind of like what Pat Price would do. He would come up with these amazing things after exposing, in Russia, what was going on at a facility there with the big crane and all that. So my main point is that if you haven't looked at Birdie's session, please do. It's, as I say, when have we had someone else who comes along besides maybe Daz and a few others who do live sessions, and they're really right on. So the method is good. The unknowns are there, and I hear what you're saying, and I'm open-minded about it. And it's just that we don't understand really. I'm with Jacques Vallée. I mean, he's the expert. He said, we've been studying this stuff for 50 years, and we're still in the dark about what's really happening. So all of that's going on. And in the meantime, we try to make remote viewing as accurate as we can, as doing it as blind as possible. But not always, because if it's operational, you sometimes have to know a little bit about what's going on. But anyway, just sort of to stress that thing about the session you did. And I don't know if we want to open up questions soon or what. I'm happy to talk, or we can just have questions. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go ahead and open up to questions. I just want to say that, Jon, I just really appreciate your viewpoint. We are working together in remote viewing, and we have different approaches and viewpoints on this. And I think that it's really cool that we have different approaches and viewpoints on this. Yeah. And I appreciate your viewpoint so much that, I love you so much, Jon. You're amazing.
I'm glad you're back. We're all glad you're back. People have missed you badly, and your unique presence and unique talent in the field. So
yeah, I know. I push the envelope for sure. Mm-hmm. And I'm really glad to be doing so, and super excited to be doing this. And I think that, looking at the luminaries in the field like Jacques Vallée, and it's really interesting that he told you that we shouldn't be doing this. And we're coming up into a point where I think we're going to be dealing with disclosure in a broad way. I think that we've had slow disclosure since 2017, since the New York Times article Above the Fold, talking about Lou Elizondo in his work at ATIP, and his work, as somebody exploring this phenomenon, the Navy pilots, and then it's kind of cascaded into our own U.S. Congress being involved in looking at legislation and talking about the UFO phenomenon, and some of our Congress members in the House and in the Senate really pushing for disclosure. And I kind of wonder what you think, Jon, about what disclosure is going to mean to all of us. Before we open up to questions, I really wonder what you think disclosure is going to mean for humanity. If the president of the United States, whether it's Joe Biden right now or Trump in at the end of January, if one of them comes out and says, hey, we're not alone, if this drone situation continues to grow, which it seems to be growing and growing and growing, if one of these people comes out and says, hey, we're not alone, this is a non-human intelligence, nothing to be afraid of, what do you think that the people are going to think about this?
Well, I think it's a $24 trillion question, I guess. I don't think that the government or anybody else is going to release all that they know about the reality. I think there's going to be a substantial amount of bad news, whether it's a prison planet or what, or that we've got some sort of environmental catastrophe coming, the nuclear weapons and all of that. There's, as everyone knows, it appears that the UFOs have been monitoring our nuclear installations, and ever since the first nuclear bomb was exploded back in 1947 or so. So I think, yeah, if in fact, though, some of that is released and we learn some major thing about us, like that we were genetically engineered, it's going to produce blowback, but it's also going to upset many religions, the Christian religion and others. So it's going to be of massive societal impact. But as I say, I don't think we're going to actually get all the bad news. We may get a taste or two of it from some of the catastrophic disclosure. And for people who haven't heard that, at the Seoul conference, it was mentioned that we would like to get disclosure that's orderly, through the government, but that we might not be able to. And it could be catastrophic disclosure, like if France or Brazil or some country comes out and says, hey, folks, we've got the goods. Yeah, we did send a lot of our craft to the United States, but we know the truth and we're going to tell some of it. And it's very interesting that all these decades, the countries all defer to the United States as the central repository for information and any artifacts that are created. So I don't think that's going to happen either, although you can't be sure. But I just think it's not going to be wildly, it's not going to displace our societal culture in 2025, although it may make a slight impact. Again, that's just a guess. I've been following stuff, but I haven't been following the UFO field as closely as I used to. So, but we're all sort of following it right now, right? I mean, it's remarkable that it's so much in the media. Anyway, so that's just my brief answer on that.
Okay, let's open this up to questions for Jon. Okay, Julian, you are first.
Yeah, hey Birdie, hey Jon.
Hello.
Great presentation, by the way, and really good and substantive discussion
Thank you.
about non-human intelligence, which is more than can be said for many meetups that I go to. But anyway, so a couple of things. I actually live in Central Jersey, and I actually live exactly at the epicenter of all these drone happenings recently. I myself have not seen a drone, but a few days ago, through the blinds, on my windows, I actually, in the middle, it was already past sundown. I saw a blue light that kind of penetrated inside my house. And for a few seconds, the electricity in my house went down. And it wasn't just like someone turned off the breaker, where it's just like a sudden turning off of the electricity. It actually just over a couple of seconds just wound down. Like all the lights in my house just slowly draw down, and then a few seconds later went back up. And there was blue light, so it must have been a blue drone that must have been on the block in the row of houses where I live. So yeah, that's what happened. A little trivia for the guests here. Um, and the second thing, totally different, is regarding the very civil debate, by the way, which I highly commend, about what we think is probably the alien agenda. If there is just one, quite frankly, there's probably multiple. But anyway, uh, regarding that, what do you, Bodie, Jon, and quite frankly, everybody else, have you ever heard of um, Marshall and his son, Reed Marshall? I forget the father, what his name is, first name. with regard to their take on the non-human intelligence agenda. And if you haven't heard of it, I can give you a brief synopsis.
I'm not familiar with Marshall, no.
Yeah, me either.
Highly recommend. I've been trying to make headway with regard to aliens and consciousness and remote viewing and psi phenomena and everything in between, including spiritual matters
What's
for
this
about a
person,
year now.
what's this
And
person's name? Marshall, James,
uh,
Marshall?
Marshall, I forget the first name of the father, and his son is Reed Marshall. I highly,
Okay,
highly recommend you
okay,
check him out. It's very substantive. It's not, for the, anyway.
okay,
Um, so Marshall Sr., he was a channeler, which usually has to be taken a little bit dubiously, but he channeled what he terms the allies of humanity, where the basic thesis is that there are negative non-human intelligence, multiple of them, and the agenda is rather negative. The positive aliens were here, but they withdrew because they wanted to have humanity have a non-vague interaction, because otherwise they wouldn't know who's positive, who's negative. Because even negative aliens, they use tactics like screen memories, like showing up as clowns to kids or showing up as, flowery, positive messages to adults, abductions, hybridization. The general thesis is that that's negative. It's meant to lull people into a sense of complacency or disinformation or confusion, while basically the human race is hybridized out of free will. And
okay.
the main point here is free will. Grays are, for the most part, drones. They don't have free will. And it seems like it's almost like this dualistic competition between the intelligences that are for homogenization of life on the universe versus
Okay,
those that work for preservation of free will.
Julian, I think we get the message about this person is well looking into, but I don't think we should, relate his entire viewpoint right now.
Yeah, sorry, that might have been a little bit long-winded, but anyway, that's the Marshall and his son Reed Summers. He has, he's more of just like a advocate in it, and I highly recommend that everybody checks out their work.
Okay, thank you. We'll do so.
Okay, cool. Okay, Kit, you're up next.
Hi,
Hey,
great to
kid.
see you guys. Anyway, John, I've shared with you some of my experiences, but I won't spend a lot of time on that so other people can talk. And I really miss interacting with Birdie in person back in the old days. So anyway, my question had to do with Stephen Greer, because he's a well-known person in the field. And he claims to have evidence, even photographic evidence. And I was wondering if you've seen that or what your thoughts are about his work, because he also says he uses remote viewing. I did utilize his method to call in a ship, and it worked. So I do think there's something there. But anyway, what do you think about Stephen Greer's
Well, Stephen
point?
Greer has a reputation of holding that wonderful contactee and whistleblower meeting back in Washington, D.C. many years ago. And he's written several books and people credit him for that. He's taken a lot of criticism in recent years, and I haven't been following him that closely. I do know two people who worked with him in the early days, and both left him because of various reasons. And he does again say that all of the UFOs apparently are positive, and he's promoted the CE5, where you go out and try to summon them and charges money to do that. And some people really enjoy doing that. He also apparently claims the term, but as I mentioned, Jacques Vallée is the one who invented the CE5 term, not Stephen Greer, in my understanding, and from, I guess, Wikipedia and other places. So that's all I can really know about Stephen Greer, except that I know he wants to be more active now, and apparently from the things he's done, he's not being invited by various other people to take part, like in the Seoul conference.
Yeah, I would just like to add about Stephen Greer that I agree with John here that, you know, he has been on the kind of the periphery, not in the main aspect of remote viewing or UFOs, but he has had a huge presence. He did amazing work, absolutely amazing work with disclosure in the year like 2000, 2001, when he brought a number of people to the Capitol, to the press building, and held a press conference on disclosure. He really did try to make disclosure happen. But he is a proponent of the positive, completely across the board, positive ET feeling, you know, that every single possible ET is positive. And I personally do not feel that that's the case. I know John probably feels that too. I'm not going to speak for you, John, but I think that's the case. But he has a unique perspective, and but I don't agree 100% with his stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Andrew.
Oh, hi. Thank you for your presentation, John. I just was wondering, you know, because it's a lot about extraterrestrials and ETs and stuff, and I've been in remote viewing for about 3 years. It seems like so little of it focuses on actual telepathic ability, although that is part of remote viewing. I've seen some professional demonstrations, and it's definitely part of it, but there's no like faction of it where it's like taken seriously in the remote viewing community about telepathic ability itself. And since these beings seem to largely communicate telepathically, you would think that we would be able to develop some kind of specific discipline that would focus solely on the ability to communicate telepathically, even if that meant the starting point was just between you and another human being, so that you knew what that actually felt like what it actually feels like to totally communicate to another living human being telepathically only. And that way, if you're dealing with a spirit or an alien or whatever you call it, you're going to be able to make that distinction a little bit better. Remote viewing, it telepathic ability is involved, but it doesn't seem to be a focal point at any time in it. There's no separate discipline for it. And it seems over and over again, that's how they like to communicate. And yet there's no discipline outside of remote viewing that specifically focuses on telepathic communication. And I understand why that may have been a problem at the beginning, because you don't want to confuse those two things. You want to actually be able to see the target from a distance and not be getting the information from another person. But we're dealing with UFOs and other beings in this context, and it's like telepathic communication is their main form of communication, and it's been entirely left out of all of the disciplines. They just call it remote viewing, even though it's part of it. How come you're part of IRVA? You do so many studies. Why can't there be a specific, at least a question into what does it take to communicate telepathically, even to a living human being? I mean, you got to start there with a real telepathic communication to another human being so that you know what that feels like. Okay, so that's an interesting and important point that you raised. One reason that I guess it wasn't the reason I joined Prue's TDS back then, but it something I welcomed, even though I wasn't actually in touch with them. She was the only one that had in her matrix a column for paraphysical communication or paraphysical entities, and nobody else did. So she was already ahead of the game back then. And since I've been into UFOs, it didn't freak me out that she put that into the method. And she would encourage us, you know, we would be required to do 20-page sessions, by the way, eventually.
And she would say, if you run into a person or an entity, have a conversation with them. And so we did. And who knows how accurate they were. But Prue, built a very successful early business with her insights and her methods, which involved this kind of material. Although clearly most of the clients, or maybe all of them, were stuff that you could actually materially prove existed. Like a circus, money, someone running away with the money in Australia, things like that. But as far as telepathic communication, in a way, what we were doing was we were channeling. And Angela Ford, who was a remote viewer for the Fort Meade unit, when I did a little study with her, she said, "John, you're channeling." I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm channeling." She said, "You're channeling." So you're getting information from some source, and definitely not from your conscious mind. Maybe it's from your higher self. Maybe it's at times from an ET. But I think part of the reason that IRVA and others haven't tried to develop a telepathic channel is that it's a very nebulous field that we're talking about here compared with channeling, which actually, where you can sit there and feel like you're getting impressions and write them down and reply, So I'm not quite sure why someone hasn't really put forward a specific method for telepathic communication. And maybe Birdie knows or has more to say about that.
I just thought that if that was established between you and another living human being, and you got that it would be, if you develop that discipline, it would be easier to communicate to ETs, because that's the method by which most of them communicate. I mean, over and over again, you hear that it's always telepathic. That's why there's no physical evidence, but we're unwilling to set something up to communicate telepathically to another human being who's fully capable of it. There's no separate discipline for it.
Well, maybe you could lobby IRVA about that then.
That's what I'm doing right here. I mean, you're a member of IRVA, and I'm nobody.
I'm not on the board. I'm just a member.
I'm a nobody, though. You're somebody.
No, I'm a grassroots person like you.
Hey, Andrew. Okay, so one of the things I've been working on is extraterrestrial communication and communicating with particular beings out there. And I think that, yeah, you can call it channeling. Absolutely. There is like a continuum here, a spectrum of all of these kind of psychic arts, if you will, from reading tarot cards to giving psychic readings to remote viewing, having psychic experiences, all the way to having communication. And I think it's on a continuum. Absolutely. And in remote viewing, you can have a communication with an entity, and it will give you a response back if you ask it a question. And is that literally getting a response from another entity, or are you translating some kind of information that's in that entity's mind in this moment in time, and you write it on the page and it feels like a direct communication? And honestly, I do not know what the answer to that is, but I know that it's possible. And I don't know that we can say that all of these entities are telepathic, or that most are telepathic. I think that there is a subset that are telepathic. And because, for example, I just did this session on the drone entities, the drones, I'm putting that in quotation marks, and I did not get like the standard kind of telepathic message that would normally be received if I were talking, so to speak, with a gray alien, if I were doing a session on a gray alien. This was very different, and it was more like I was probing what they were thinking rather than them giving me a message. And so I think that, we're in the Wild West. I mean, remote viewing has only been in the forefront for 30 years since Stargate was declassified. And this is a new field, and we haven't codified most of what's out there. or what we're talking about. It's a new field. It's completely new. We're kind of feeling our way in the dark because science hasn't caught up yet. They haven't had the ability to research this kind of thing because, you know, of all of the cultural conditioning around all of this. So we're kind of feeling our way in the dark, and there's like people like John, like me, like others in remote viewing who are trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure this out desperately. And we're, you know, we're kind of just, we're on the fly. There's so many people, interesting scientists out there that are just starting to get in the field. We have people, really incredible researchers like Gary Nolan and others who are now starting to look at what is consciousness. We don't even have a definition for that yet. It hasn't been codified in the scientific community. So we're walking in the dark with our eyes closed and a blindfold on, and we're feeling like the blind man and the elephant kind of story, where we're trying to figure things out slowly, carefully, and maybe not so carefully. Maybe we're making determinations as we go, but this is an entirely new field of research that the scientific community hasn't completely embraced. So that's where we're at.
I wasn't being scientific about it. I'm just saying I thought that if there was some type of method where you could attempt to establish telepathic communication with another living human being, you would get feedback the same way as when remote viewing, you know, you want feedback for remote viewing, that you'd be better at it, and then you would know what it feels like, and you would be more likely to be able to make more sense out of contact with something that is not human. I just wondered why there was no discipline that allowed for, or that they didn't think it was important that two living, breathing human beings could communicate with each other telepathically, and all of it is always about communicating telepathically with some alien or unverifiable source. Is all.
I think that the reason that we haven't had that kind of study is because we are poor. We are poor at telepathic communication between humans. We have a hard time. There is an incredible podcast that I recommend that absolutely everyone listen to. It's called the Telepathy Tapes, and it is about children who are nonverbal, who are autistic, or have other kinds of issues. And it is absolutely incredible. And it talks about how they are able to communicate using nonverbal means, meaning telepathy. It's really amazing. I highly recommend it. But for most of us, we walk around day to day and our minds are filled with so much stuff. It's really hard to clue in to anything around us. But we do have those moments when we know that someone is thinking about us or someone is looking at us. And so we do have those moments, but most of the time we humans are very poorly equipped to handle telepathy. But different alien species perhaps can give us this blast, like I had when I had my encounters with the gray dude. And even in the drone sessions, I had a thought ball lobbied at me, which I still can't quite figure out. I still can't quite decode. You know, different species have a higher ability than we humans do. So I think we're just kind of stuck, honestly.
Well, thank you guys for answering my question.
Sure.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, Michelle, my friend.
So I was going to ask my question in just a second, but I was also going to say something really quick about the telepathy. They are starting to do studies of interfacing with machines using humans to machines, and I think there's also been one that connected people through a machine, and then they were able to do a slight form of telepathy. So I think there are studies starting that way. You can look that up there. You can Google that; it'll come up. But anyway, what I was going to say is, when we're looking at remote viewing, or we're looking at the drones or any particular thing we want to think. It seems like people either focus on everything being just alien or just interdimensional or just mundane. And I think that what we're looking at often is a combination of these things, especially when we're looking at things like remote viewing or these drones. I mean, there's, you know, all different phenomena. They're not even all the same drones. If you look at the ones that are seen in the UK, they don't look identical to the ones here. And just like if we're thinking about just within the universe here, maybe we're talking about different species of extraterrestrials, but dimensionals and all, you know, kind of the theory of everything begins to tie in. And I don't know how we separate those out at this point. So what are y'all's thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think we can separate them out either. If IRVA can't do it, how are we supposed to? But we tried to, you know, like you said, there's experiments going on with telepathy like that, and there's other ones that are trying to discern, you know, various aspects of this. Dean Radin has done a lot of experiments too, and Julia Mossbridge. Someone mentioned earlier that I might take part in studies. I actually don't take part in studies because I think you get more done doing practical, detail-oriented stuff. Like I worked for 10 years with Marty Rosenblatt in ARV because you get actual results. Not to put down science and the formal studies, but they're usually very slow, very limited, except for people like Dean Radin and others who. So I don't have a quick answer for that. I think we're just in a vast. You know, there's trillions of galaxies now, they're saying, you know, trillions. And I think hundreds of thousands, millions of planets have been where we are before. Just to cover my views, you know, where civilizations get AI and they get nuclear power and they get computers and they reach a turning point. And we're at that turning point. And a lot of people talk about, well, we're moving toward a new paradigm. Let's hope so. But I'll bet a lot of civilizations have destroyed themselves, and partly why the ETs monitor us so much is many of them may not want us to destroy ourselves. And I agree with whoever said that there's quite a variety, as I've said in my presentation, there's quite a variety of entities that are here. And when SETI and those people say, well, there's no evidence, look at the damn reports that we've had for centuries, you know, for decades about this. No, they're here, they're different, they have different agendas, and so you may be in touch with one person who's in your bedroom and it appears, and I think these things happen, they haven't happened to me, but by the way, they happened to 4 other people in Birdie's group, Crew's group back then, where these hammerhead aliens came into their rooms. And we have the same thing with the hitchhiker effect now, remember, where people claim they've gone to the Skinwalker Ranch and then they go home and they also have stuff entering there. And there's plenty of reports of orbs of all kinds. People have sent me photographs. And anyway, there's just an incredible variety out there. We're kind of at a loss, and we just try to focus on specific things that we think we can get some answers to.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So I just want to comment that yeah, I totally 100% agree with John here. We don't know what we're looking at. And so many of us have experienced this kind of effect. And I wonder, and this is kind of my personal feeling, I think that perhaps what's going on is that when you learn a skill such as remote viewing and you practice it, you're opening an aperture, you're exercising your psychic muscles, so to speak. And so you are open to more than what you normally would be. And so you can see things even in your home and experience things that maybe you wouldn't normally. And I think that the hitchhiker effect, my own opinion, and I know that probably most people in remote viewing would disagree with me, but I think that really the hitchhiker effect is really just that opening of the aperture and you experiencing things that are already there. Now, I might be wrong. Maybe things follow you home, but I don't think so. I think that these are things that are already there, but I might be wrong. What do you think, John?
Well, you know what I think.
I know what you think.
Tell the rest of us what you think, John.
I love you so much, John.
There's been enough reports, you know, by the Skinwalker people of actual physical harm to some of these people with the hitchhiker stuff. So I tend to believe them, unfortunately.
I don't know. I go crazy every time I watch Skinwalker Ranch and they're going down in the cave or they're digging. And I just want to say, just keep digging, bring a new person, let the headache happen because it is killing my soul. Get somewhere, make progress. But
Yeah, it's like watching what was that? The one in Nova Scotia, the one
Oak
about
Island?
Oak Island, yeah. I actually did
Yeah.
a project on that, by the way, and I have 3 grandparents from Nova Scotia, so I was very much into that. Anyway, season after season of nothing or planted Maraveda coins and stuff. And I think that Skinwalker Ranch probably suffers from the same thing, although I don't watch it that closely.
I think stuff goes on they don't show, but I think it's extremely frustrating while I'm watching. So
Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you. Okay, Del, what's your question or comment?
Oh, hi, Birdie. Hi, John. Hello, everyone. Thank you for holding the meeting too, because it's so generous of you, and I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much. So this question is for Birdie, and it's in regard to the remote viewing of the drones. And in part 1, you mentioned that the helicopter pilots got a message, and that more than one pilot got a message. And so after that, I think you say, watch us. So I was wondering, was that the message the pilots received? And did you explore further that any of those messages that they received? And how was that message delivered to them? Thank you.
Okay, Del, that is a really great question. Yes, I did explore, and I'm going to be posting part 2 and part 3. I did this session over 3 days before I looked at the reveal for this session, December 3rd, 4th, and 5th, right before my birthday, in fact. And I explored what the message was. I also explored a number of other things, which were super interesting and enlightening. So I'll post those sessions either tonight or in the morning when I get a little time. I just finished a 5-day class, so I'm pretty tired, but I'm having fun tonight. Let me tell you, John is amazing, and I'm so glad he's here. But the message that the pilots received was a thought ball, like what I received when I was doing the original remote viewing of this session. A thought ball is my own word. It's my own word. It's my own, lexicon for what getting a message from a non-human intelligence is like, because oftentimes it is an encapsulated message. It's really hard to describe. It's something that you have to think about for a while to unravel. And so what I got in this session was this message that I had to kind of pull pieces out, which I tried to do during the first part of the session, unsuccessfully, to be quite honest, because it was so rich and so thick and so complicated, and most of it's beyond my understanding. It's just like, I'm way too dumb to figure it out. I'm just a dumb human being, dumb human woman, old woman, I can't figure it out. But what the pilots received was also a thought ball. I got this so clearly that they got literally the exact same thought ball that I got. That's what I got in the session. Part 1, 2, and 3 was that they got the same thought ball. It was like prepared for us. I even talk about that in, I think, part 2 or part 3. I don't remember. You'll find out. But I got this. There was this message that was like, watch us. You've got to look at us. You've got to wake up. This whole idea of waking up was super, super, super important. And the pilots got this same message, that we have to wake up, that there's something wrong with what we're doing as humanity. And this is a common message that contactees receive. I mean, this is nothing new. This is a common message. And I don't know if this message is so common that it means nothing. I honestly don't know. I only know that it's the message that we have to wake up. We're not treating our Earth properly.
They live here too. They don't come from here, but they're here now. And we don't treat each other well. That was another really big part of it, which I've actually never gotten that kind of message before. I've certainly gotten the message that we're not treating the planet well, and the whole, we might destroy ourselves, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's a really common message that contactees get. But I also got this, part of this message was that we don't treat each other well. There was this whole idea that there is this echelon of people that have all of the resources, and there's this whole, the rest of the people don't have the resources. You know, it's the 1% versus the 99%, frankly. That's kind of the message that I got. And it was really interesting to me that whatever these are, that they were concerned with how we treat each other and how we allocate our resources. It was like the message really had to do with resource allocation, resource management. I mean, resources are a big deal to human beings. I mean, who has the energy, who can provide the energy, who has the food, who has the housing. And most of us are way down here, right? You know, I'm way down here for sure. I'm not in the 1%, I'm in the 99% for sure. And, you know, I mean, this whole message kind of had to do with this deep unhappiness. They were upset, they were sad, they were upset that there was this differentiation between the people that had the resources and the people that didn't. And I don't know. Maybe that's just me putting a layer over what the message was. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that it did have to do with something like that. I mean, these messages are intractable in some way. They're really complicated. They're not easy to decipher or figure out. These messages are just really weird, you know. They're I don't know. It was really unusual, and I never had a message like that before in a session or in an experience. I've had multiple UFO experiences in my life, and this was not like that. This was really different. Whatever these beings were, it was some intelligence I had never come into contact with before, ever. And I've looked at, okay, guys, I've been a remote viewer for almost 30 years, and I have looked at, you name it. I've looked at it, Roswell, you know, I mean, everything. This was not like that. This was something really different, and they were really concerned about how we treat each other. And I don't know. There was something about that in there. I don't know.
I wanted to say something about this too, if I might.
Yeah, please, John, please.
Clearly,
Yeah, thanks, John.
Affected by that. I just want to say that Philip K. Dick, as you probably know, also had thought balls, the author, and they made him led to many of his books, but he also had tremendous difficulty discerning and deciphering what was going on. And I've come across one or two other people who have had these thought balls. So just to say that Birdie is not making this up, other people have this happen to you, and it can be very puzzling. And even when you're doing remote viewing and you don't have a thought ball, you're getting a conglomeration of impressions that you can't sort out. And someone like Joe McMoneagle, who's spoken a lot about this, about what you do when you get all these impressions, talks about how it can even change from day to day, how stuff is coming into you, and it can be quite difficult. So just to say that, you know, clearly remote viewing is not a linear sort of rational process. It's all kinds of stuff can go on, and it's remarkable that you had those particular impressions, that these are unique among the millions of different ETs. Maybe some new ones have come our way.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's extraordinary, and I appreciate you replying like that too, because I do notice that sometimes I can't either write fast enough, or I can't draw exactly what it is, or with stuff coming through as well. So, but thank you, Birdie. I just wanted, and John, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because I just really wasn't sure, but I'm really looking forward to part 2 and 3 of that viewing. Yeah, it was excellent. Thank you, Birdie. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Del. Thank you so much. Okay, Lana, my friend.
Hey guys. Yeah, thank you for doing this. This was fantastic. I wanted to just maybe address a little bit about the negative entities or the hitchhikers and stuff like that. I mean, when you remote view, do you use any kind of like psychic protection around yourself? Because I do dowsing and I've played a little bit with Oracle and tarot cards and stuff like that. I don't do anything unless even remote viewing, I don't do it unless I put protection around me, because there are dark entities that can come in, and they will fool you. Channeling and stuff like that is very dangerous unless you put protection around you.
Could I just speak about that first, because I probably have less to say. So, I'm a materialist, right? I'm up from leftism, left political background. I don't seem to get any kinds of contacts or negative stuff happening to me. I don't do protection. I know many remote viewers do, and probably I should, but so far so good. Like Birdie says, she has never had any negative impressions doing remote viewing. Me neither. So maybe I'll get there. But right now it's sort of all good. Sorry to say. I'll leave it there.
Yep.
Okay, I will talk about this a little bit. So I also haven't had any negative experiences, just like John. John is a materialist, reductionist. I love him so much for that. I, however, am on the opposite side of the spectrum. I am, all about the vapor, the life between lives, the all of the spiritual stuff. But I also haven't had any kind of negative experiences. I mean, sometimes when I'm in the process of remote viewing, I will experience something that's negative, whether it's looking at like a World War II situation or or an alien entity that is a more negative entity. And there are plenty of those out there, guys, plenty of those out there. It's not all sunshine and roses, despite what Dr. Greer says. Not all aliens are good people. It's just like humans. Some of us are great and some of us are goobers, and there's plenty of goobers out there. And but some of them are amazing and spiritual and cool. But even the goobers that I have remote viewed, they didn't impact me in a negative way. But there are many different kinds of things that remote viewers can do to feel better about what they're doing. One of the things you can do is to imagine like white light around you before you do a session. Some remote viewers like to light sage and sage their area. Some like to enter the process with a prayer or a mantra that means something to them, depending on your religious or spiritual practice. And there's all kinds of things. To me, these are all psychological tools that allow your own spirit to feel comfortable with what you're doing. And I guess I'm like John in that way, kind of a, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a non-believer. I would say that I believe in literally everything. So I'm kind of the opposite of John, but in a way we meet in the middle this way, because I don't have a particular spiritual or religious practice, but I do think that some of these psychological tools that you can use can be extraordinarily helpful, just like they are in regular life, to allow yourself to understand that nothing can affect you. My personal belief in all of remote viewing is that we are connected to literally everything. That's why we can do this. I don't believe that the term remote viewing is even accurate. I don't think there's anything remote about it. And there's certainly the viewing part, I mean, we look online. If you look up remote viewing, you'll see all kinds of cool examples where people sketch what looks exactly like the photograph. Well, I'm a terrible artist. I mean, look at my stuff online. I'm terrible. I draw stick figure. I mean, look behind me. These are my sessions. I've got the Tic Tac UFO and a page from my the drones behind me. I stuck up for fun, and I'm a terrible artist. I can't draw to save my life at all, but I know what I know, and I get really cool information. And so I think that there's nothing remote about it. I think that all this information resides within ourselves, and I know that many people may disagree with this, but I think that we're already connected to everything we're already looking at. And I think that's why this works. It's non-local, it's quantum. I think that we have to reevaluate how we look at the world, how we look at each other, how we look at the whole idea of remote viewing. I think that we're already connected to everything. So I don't know. I don't worry about protection because I feel that I'm invincible. I'm already connected to everything, and it's just going to play out the way it does. But maybe I'm a fool. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, Michelle.
I was just going to say something popped in my head, and this is apropos nothing. But earlier, I think someone was talking about why wasn't Greer called to like any of the UFO conferences or something. But I was just going to say, did anyone else hear Dr. Sala had been nominated? Anyway, we'll see what happens. That's all I was going to say.
Nominated
Yeah.
for what?
To go in front of one of the UFO Congress things they're doing, but I don't know if it's going to happen. But
Yeah, and as to be an advisor to
Yeah.
people in the government, about exopolitics.
Oh, wow.
yeah, so that's exciting if it happens, but we'll see. So
I actually saw something about that he was going to be appointed in some way I'm not even sure what, but I saw something online, maybe on X, that he was going to be appointed in some way to handle the disclosure process.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a lot of, I think, surprising things coming up. So who knows?
They say 2025 may be a very eye-opening, hell-raising. Who knows?
What do you know about Sala, Michelle?
Oh, I just follow him a lot, but I just thought it was really interesting because usually it seems like the people they have speak at any of these UFO congresses or advisors are people that haven't even been involved with ufology. Just people that I don't even know why they're there, but all the people that have been doing things for years are seldom asked or invited. So I just thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, he's a very interesting guy. I mean, he's got a lot of insider connections and stuff, gets a lot of information. So,
yeah.
You know.
And I guess, he works with some supposed whistleblowers. I would like JP, and he works with Elena Dannon, who she's in contact with the Galactic Federation and other.
Yeah, I was at the GSIC conference in September, and I mean, UFOs appeared on demand by Elena and her contacts. It was amazing. I mean, I had night vision there. I saw it with my own eyes, so it was pretty amazing.
Well, there are certainly individuals that I think are super connected in some way. Absolutely, absolutely. I am not one of those people that can call the ships in, but I can tell you what they're thinking. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Jon, so much from the bottom of my heart for
thank you, Birdie, and
being
also
here with
everybody
us
who came
tonight.
too.